Hi everyone, Old Badger here, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about my Stamplar build. I've only recently started running Stamplars, and to be honest, I'm having a great time with it. They're super fun. They do a lot of really good damage, especially in trial groups and dungeons. But enough about that. I'm going to show you my build and a little bit about the progression to where I am now and what I'm planning on doing in the future. So first, let's talk about race. Two main races that you can go with, and I've tried both of them with this guy, is Red Guard or Imperial. The Red Guard, you get a little bit higher sustain, and because you get a little bit bigger stamina pool, you do have just a very slight edge when it comes to DPS. The other option is Imperial, which is what I went with because you get way more survivability, and personally I find that to be more beneficial than the one, maybe 2k higher DPS. You can go with other races, but I think really those two races are the ones that you're going to get your best results with. Next up, let's talk about gear. Now, I've run several different sets on this guy. Currently, I'm running a 5-piece Briarheart and 5-piece Reliquin. With the Briarheart, it's a really good damage stacking set that does a really great job of complementing Reliquin. You get your weapon critical, max stamina, and weapon critical, but anytime you deal critical damage, you have a 10% chance to increase your weapon damage by 439 for 10 seconds, plus your critical strikes during that time heal you for 595. It's almost like a stamina version of Power Surge in a roundabout sort of way. And you can proc this every 15 seconds. Because we do have high critical in the ballpark of 70% or more, you do a lot of crits. So this does proc pretty much as soon as the cooldown is up every time. The traits we're using is Nirnhoned, and you want to make sure that that is in your main hand. On your main hand, you're going to get the most damage benefit from this. On your offhand, you're going to want Sharpened or Infused. Infused probably does just a bit more damage because you're going to get a little bit better proc from the poison. Your bow, you're going to want also Nirnhoned. I don't currently have it. And on your enchantment, you're going to want the Befoul enchantment for disease. And then you're going to also want to utilize poisons. Now, for your monster set, you can run a couple of different monster sets here. I selected the Stormfist. For starters, it does really good damage. It has a stamina recovery. It's got a pretty low cooldown at 8 seconds. And it was super easy to get. I mean, Tempest Island is a breeze to do on Vet. Other options you could look at is Veladreth. With Veladreth, you get increased weapon damage, and then you got a huge 20% chance to summon 3 disease spores that deal a little over 10,000 disease damage with a cooldown of 9 seconds. This is a really good set, but there are some disadvantages to it that I actually just heard from one of the guys in the guild about the mechanics of the disease spores. Because of that and the difficulty of getting it, it's not exactly on my radar right now. You could also probably go with Selene's. I would probably go with Selene's before Bellatrix. Just then again, that's in part because of the fact that in the future I'm going to be running the new DLC's monster set, which is geared towards werewolves. This guy's a werewolf, so that monster set's going to be a damage stacking, so you get weapon damage. Plus, anytime you consume ultimate, your weapon or spell damage is increased by twice the amount of ultimate consumed. So if you have a full-on 500 point ultimate up and you use it, you're going to get an increase to your weapon and spell damage of 1,000 for the duration that is up. And I believe that duration is for 10 seconds. Don't quote me on that. Our body pieces, of course, it's Reliquin. I mean, it's the end thing right now for stamina damage. You get the basic weapon crit. You gain Minor Slayer, another bout of weapon crit, and then your light and heavy attacks apply a proc on the target that deal 200 physical damage every 1 second, and this can stack up to 20 times. And even with this character who does a fair amount of heavy attacks, it's super easy to get the 20 stacks. Every time that you apply it, it actually resets the counter, so you're not really fighting it as much as you would think. It's really easy to get those 20 stacks on, and each stack actually increases the damage by 189 physical damage per stack. Now, some of the sets that you could use with this guy would be Shadow of the Red Mountain. That's a very good proccing set. It's easy to get from Stonefalls. You get max stamina, max weapon damage, weapon crit, and a 10% chance when dealing weapon ability damage to proc a fire projectile that deals about 8,500 damage. And this thing's got a super low cooldown. It's every 2 seconds. And that fire projectile can proc off of any of your weapon ability damage. So poison injection, endless hell, caltrops, I believe even poisons. So any of those will actually proc that, and it procs a lot. You could also run possibly Unfathomable Darkness from Clockwork City. Not a bad set. You get crit, physical penetration, which will help with your damage, plus weapon damage. This one is a proc set that when you deal damage, you have a 10% chance to summon a Murder of Crows that lasts for 12 seconds. During that time, every 3 seconds, a crow will target the closest enemy and deal 4,000 damage. This one has a little bit longer cooldown. It's 15 seconds, but that's not really all that bad considering the uptime. So you could potentially have about an 80% uptime with that 3-second gap. Another set you could look at is, and this is one that I'm really looking at, is the Advancing Ucata. You get this from Hellross City. Now this is a heavy set, so you're going to want to run it with your jewelry and your weapons. And this set gives you weapon crit, weapon damage, and more weapon crit. The proc on this set is when you deal melee damage, your critical strike rating is increased by 400 for 5 seconds, and it stacks up to 5 times. There is no cooldown on this. So this is actually this is something I'm looking at getting. I'm short the 2 rings and the bow. I've heard a lot of people talk about how difficult it is to get the bow, almost like it's mythical. A lot of people also are talking about the Ravager set, which comes from Cyrodiil, but personally, I don't think that's a real benefit. It's very similar to the Yokata. The biggest problem is, from everything I've read online, they have taken the Ravager bow out, so you will never be able to get, if that's the case, you will never be able to get a 5-piece set. Um, Also, because this is also a heavy set, it's one of its attributes is health based, which isn't bad, but really you're not going to be too worried about health, at least especially as a Imperial. Now, let's talk about our skills. Let's see here. Now, my skills right now. This is the front on my front bar. I'm running caltrops, which is going to be morphed to razor caltrops. This is a really good skill that provides damage over time and movement debuffs. This can actually be, if you're running red Shadow of the Red Mountain, will proc your uh, fire projectile. Next is Blood Craze. This is a really good sustainment ability. It does good physical damage, puts a dot on, so this can also proc Red Mountain as well as anything else that is weapon ability. I believe it'll proc Falcon Scoria as well. Plus, when you apply this to target, and you can apply this to several targets, it's not like a one-off. It heals you for 1057 health every 2 seconds. So you could like put this on a mob and put it on a few of the targets in the mob and get a pretty decent health tick while on your front bar. Next skill is Expert Hunter. This is not used. This is totally slotted just to get the major savagery to increase our weapon critical by 2,191. That is the only reason this is slotted. And because of this, unbuffed, this character right now is setting it over, just a hair over 3,100 weapon damage. Biting Jabs, this is the morph of piercing sweeps, I think. And this is our spammable damage. This is our bread and butter, our main damage dealing ability. With this one, you deal damage to all the targets in front of you. So it's a pseudo AoE. Plus, as soon as you activate this, this isn't a big deal, but you gain major savagery from this. They do not stack, but it's great to have that major savagery up at all times. My last skill on the second from last skill on the front bar is Rearming Traps. This is from the Fighters line, and this here is a great skill. So you toss it out, and even if it doesn't get triggered by like a boss, it technically it will trigger. It will not root them or snare them, but it will cause them damage. Plus, you will get the minor force buff. Now, the duration on this says 60 seconds, but the trap itself remains out for 6 seconds. Well, once it's triggered, it stays out for 6 seconds, but after that 6 seconds, it rearms and you get another 6 seconds. So, once you have this out and it's triggered, you get the minor force buff for 12 seconds. So it's great. Make sure you throw that out in your rotation. Last skill on the front bar is the ultimate flawless Dawnbreaker. This is not used. I mean, you could use it if you need like an oh crap resource management button or ability, but what we're looking for is the slotted. You get weapon damage increased by 5%. So everything on this build is about getting high weapon damage. Alright, now on our back bar we run Endless Hell, which again this can proc Red Mountain as well as Falcon Scoria. It launches a volley of arrows that rain down from the sky, dealing a really good amount of damage. Over 1,100 physical damage every half second for 10 seconds to all enemies within 5 meters. Poison injection, this is a super awesome ability. You shoot a, you basically put a poison dot that has initial poison damage and an additional 8,500 poison over 10 seconds. Now, this gets more powerful the less health that the target has, because once they are below 50%, this deals up to 260% more damage than initially. And again, this can proc Red Mountain, it'll proc Valken Scoria. So it's a very, very potent skill. Here we have Power of Light, and this is the stamina morph of Backlash. And just like with some of the Magicka morph, this puts a beam of light on the target. It causes some physical damage, and for 6 seconds it copies up to 20% of physical damage taken, and then releases it. So for this build, it does a little over 18. It copies a little over 18,000 damage, and then releases it after 6 seconds in a burst. In addition to that, this also applies Minor Fracture and Minor Breach to a target, which reduces their physical and spell resistance by 1,320 for 6 seconds. So this is a great passive damage ability and debuff. Repentance, this is, this skill I've actually just started using, and I started using it on this build, and I love it. It is fabulous. It's a very potent heal and stamina recovery resource. So with this one, anytime a enemy falls, or an ally for that matter, you can consecrate their souls, and for each soul that you consecrate, you return almost 3,000 health and stamina. This will also heal allies. I don't believe they get the stamina, but I know it will help heal. And while it's slotted, you gain Minor Fortitude, Minor Endurance, and Minor Intellect. So this is a great skill to have on your bar for resource management and survivability. And speaking of survivability, of course, we got the tried and true Resolving Vigor, which is a heal over time effect for yourself and your allies. It's very potent. Don't spam it though. It's not like Breath of Life. You cast it once every 5 seconds if you need to. Last skill is Crescent Sweep, and this is a super cheap, very powerful ultimate. It only costs 72 ultimate, but it deals an initial almost 7,500 physical damage to all nearby enemies, on top of putting a 6-second dot that every 2 seconds deals over 3,600 damage. Now, enemies in front of you will take an additional 66% more damage. So this skill does a lot of damage, and because of the uptime on it and the low cost, you can run this almost every rotation with very little problems. Now, one of the things that I am planning on doing in the future is running the Blood Moon set, probably going to replace the Briarheart. And with that Blood Moon set that's going to be released in the next patch, next patch is all werewolf. It's going to be so awesome. So with Blood Moon, which comes from the Wolf Hunter DLC, you get weapon damage and 2 ticks of weapon crit. Now, the proc on this set is when you do a melee critical damage attack, light attack, you're granted a stack of what's called Blood Scent. Once you get 5 stacks, you become frenzied for 5 seconds, which will increase your light attack damage and light attack speed by 50% This does have a bit of a longer cooldown, 18%, but when you couple that with how strong the werewolf form's light attacks are already, and the new monster helm, it's just gonna, your light attack's gonna be devastating. I mean, it's just, I mean, there's a Outcast video of him running those sets and while transforming the werewolf on a dummy, and he burned it at just a hair over 60 seconds. I think it was a minute 3 or something like that, while in werewolf form, and it was just, I mean, it was pretty dang awesome. So that's something to consider in the future. Well, guys, sorry for stumbling my way through this. This is the first time I've done one of these, and I hope it was beneficial, and post questions and stuff about it. Y'all take it easy. Badger out.